So just over a year ago, I'm in this incredible hotel room. You can picture it. There's a plush, perfectly made bed, and this place was giant, right? Bigger than my apartment last year in Charlottesville that was a 4-bedroom with 4 friends. Had a living room, a dining room. It was an incredible spot. To anybody who stays in hotels and travels, this is an incredible upgrade. But if the story ended there, maybe I'd be giving this TED talk on how to schmooze hotel receptionists. But that's not where the story ends. Instead, I ask you to think about when you were a first year at UVA or your first day at any school, whether that be 3 months ago, just getting here, or maybe even 30 years ago. When you first got to UVA, the day your parents packed up the car with you, drove you down here, and you unpacked the car, you were nervous. You were alone. You were thinking, what is going to happen? You were uncomfortable. Now, in all that discomfort, maybe you selected a roommate that you knew pretty well from high school. Maybe you selected a roommate that you found online that had a similar interest and similar background to you. But ultimately, you were still alone. Maybe you were like me and didn't even realize that there was a form online and, well, ended up with a roommate who thought the floor was his dresser. But nonetheless, you're still there alone. And so, while I should have been ecstatic that I was in this awesome hotel room, I felt anything but at ease. Because the truth was, I was alone. That hotel room was in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in the middle of Central Africa, a country the State Department warned as Category 3, please reconsider travel. Now, I did have one saving grace. I don't think my mom could scream at me about being in Ethiopia if she didn't know I was in Ethiopia, so we at least had that. But nonetheless, I was still in Ethiopia. I was still there alone. Now, flashing back to your first day at UVA, you were nervous, you were alone. But imagine if instead of being at UVA alone, what if you were somewhere unfamiliar? What if you were in New York alone? Then how would you feel? Would you be uncomfortable? What if you were in, I don't know, let's say across the ocean in Paris? Then would you be uncomfortable? What about Addis Ababa? How would you feel then? Well, this just so happened to be the situation I was in. This was my first ever solo trip nonetheless. I had never flown across an ocean before by myself. I had never traveled by myself before. And maybe I should have picked a place that Americans typically travel. Maybe I should have picked Mexico or Europe, but there I was. But in order to understand how I ended up by myself in Ethiopia, I first have to flash back to 2018. The freshman year of high school, my parents took my brother and I aside and told us that we were going to Australia for our first ever time leaving the continent. It was a pretty big trip for us. Now, ultimately, despite this being our first trip leaving the US, you know those big planes that you use to fly across oceans, whether that be Europe or maybe Australia? You know how they all have like 3 sections of seats, 2 aisles, then that middle section you don't want to be sitting in because it's not even remotely near a window. And of course, the middle seat of the middle section, best possible seat in the plane, because then you're stuck in a middle seat and you can't even have a chance of glaring out the window. Well, of course, for the luxurious 16 hours of the flight down to Australia, I was stuck in the back row. And despite that, I still caught the travel bug. I was hooked, and I knew I couldn't go back. There was no way. So coming back to the US after that trip, I knew I had to figure out more ways to travel. As a student without an income on a budget, cost ended up being a pretty large barrier. I knew that there was no way I was going to be able to travel without an income. But then I learned about this magical currency called points and miles. Now, luckily for me, that points and miles currency ultimately allowed me to start helping friends and family book travel for a fraction of the cost. I was able to help people book trips for hundreds of dollars instead of thousands of dollars. And I had so many requests coming in that I even started a blog called Nonstop Points to help people use points and miles. With that in mind, I also, of course, started booking my own travel. I had to practice what I preached. So I've now traveled to nearly 50 countries, having flown well over 100,000 miles this year alone, which scarily equates to nearly 2 weeks solid in the sky. And despite all that, I wasn't an experienced traveler back then. I was an experienced traveler when I first got to Ethiopia, when I was alone there. And so I planned out everything I possibly could. I picked that incredibly comfortable hotel that I knew had incredible security. I knew that the hotel would also probably have stomach-safe foods, so the gluten-free American wouldn't have unforeseen difficulties in the country. But nonetheless, I was still stuck there. And in that discomfort, I tried to avoid it. I tried to stay in my bubble of planning as much that I could with booking a tour that had the best possible ratings on TripAdvisor. But I still wasn't at ease. Despite all this, I went to bed one night. I was ready to get up the next morning to finally go on my tour of the city. It had been a big build-up. The trip had gone on for weeks. I was traveling with a friend, but finally I was in Ethiopia. And so when I wake up the next morning, I get a WhatsApp message on my phone. And unfortunately, the guide had canceled. Now, I had two choices here. I could either stay at my comfortable hotel, I didn't have to leave, I could stay by the glimmering pool and relax in comfort, or I could choose the uncomfortable option. I could choose to go out and explore Addis Ababa. I'd have to rely on the kindness of strangers, I'd have to come up with another plan, I'd have to leave my comfort zone, but ultimately, I'd get to see the city. And I figured, it was my one day there, how could I not go out and try to explore? So instead of sitting in my room, I went downstairs and I tried to find anybody. It's just someone who could help me figure out a way to explore the city. And with that, I came across a guy who claimed he had friends who would give me a tour. He told me to take a seat, and when I took a seat, he called around to see if there were any guides available. He quickly let me know that one of his friends, or at least I was hoping this guy was a guide, still not too sure about that, was able and was going to come over and pick me up. So I ran upstairs, I grabbed all my stuff, and I returned downstairs to the lobby. But as I got downstairs, I saw this car pull up just outside the glass front windows of the hotel. Now, this would be nice if this was a fancy Mercedes or something that you'd expect a tour guide to have. But no, this was a beat-up Subaru. And as I started walking towards that glass front doors, I saw that the car had dents in the side, the windows were chipped, and quite frankly, I was scared shitless. As I got to the car, you know that look that someone has when they're absolutely terrified, eyes are wide open, face is kind of getting red? Unfortunately, that was me. The fight or flight response was kicking in, and I had to decide what I was going to do. Was I going to back out and go into the comfortable hotel, or was I going to get into this stranger's car? It was also the middle of the night back on the East Coast, so I actually had to make the decision myself. I couldn't rely on others to do that for me. And ultimately, I made the leap of faith. I got in the car, and I figured you only live once, right? Yet the little voice inside my head was telling me that I didn't want that once to be very short-lived. So the guide, Sammy, starts driving me around. He takes me to a museum and starts showing me around the museum. But I could tell right off the bat that this wasn't his specialty. He was reading the exact same script off the wall and wasn't able to add much to the situation that I could. Luckily, elementary school me would have been very excited to see Lucy, which is our first ancestor's 3.2 million-year-old bones. But nonetheless, this guide was trying to give me the experience that I thought I wanted. I thought I wanted the routine tour. I thought I wanted the experience that all the other tourists were going to get on the bus and seeing all the exact same sights. But then I realized that he didn't want to give that tour, and that wasn't the tour I really wanted. As any experienced traveler knows, that the best things happen off the beaten path, not on them. Now, I wasn't an experienced traveler, but I was still ready to take a leap of faith. So instead, I asked him to take me to his favorite spots. I asked him to show me the hidden gems of the city, the places that maybe he'd hang out with his friends with, instead of taking some random American on a tour. And so he complied. He took me to this incredible park as our first stop. It was a pretty nice spot. There was views of the city, and best of all, there were no American tour buses full of 20-plus people and all their guides. There was just me, him, some other Ethiopians, and an incredible view. That was an astonishing day, because that was the pivot point for me, where I realized that it was off the beaten path travel that really opened my eyes. And so after going to a number of destinations throughout this park and around the city, he ultimately was very excited to show me his favorite spots. But then I was getting pretty hungry. It had been a pretty long day, so I suggested he take me to his favorite restaurant. So when we finally go to the restaurant, we sit down, but we're not alone. We're with some strangers. And so I start asking, and I realize that they're a couple of his friends. Now, I was already dealing with a new restaurant, a new city, a new country. It was pretty overwhelming. I was just trying to get to know my guide, and there was a lot of newness being thrown at me. I was clearly uncomfortable. But despite this, I decided to lean into it. I decided to embrace it. I decided to make the most of that opportunity. And so, not only was it my first time having Ethiopian food, but it was my first time jumping into conversations with such complete strangers and trying to get to know them more. Now, I'm sure for many of us, President Jim Ryan has given the exact same speech at our convocations, but I decided to take his advice. Be curious and not judgmental. But then when I decided to be curious, I realized that they were just as curious about my life as I was of theirs. I had an incredible meal. I'm still not exactly sure what that's called, but it was good, I promise. I'm still not sure if it's gluten-free, but oh well. But more importantly, I was able to connect with complete strangers. I learned about their aspirations. I learned about their goals. I learned about all they wanted to do with their lives. And I realized that we really weren't all that different at the end of the day. But they were also just as curious about me. They wanted to learn about my experience here at UVA. They wanted to learn about just overall my life and all the experiences I had. Now, they were very confused how a broke college student was able to fly across continents. But luckily, a $130 ticket plus points allowed for that. We had an incredible day. We got to see the park. We got to look around the city. And I had an amazing experience connecting with complete strangers. Now, the day was wrapping up, and Sammy brought me back to the hotel. As he dropped me off, I realized that there was no conceivable way that I was ever going to have that amazing experience if I had booked a tour online, even if I had booked a private tour online, because it was off the beaten path travel. It was being open to the kindness of strangers that truly allowed me to have such a memorable day. But not only did I have such a memorable day, I learned 3 very important lessons. The first lesson I learned is that discomfort drives growth. If I wasn't willing to be uncomfortable, there was no way I would have been open to traveling off the beaten path. There was no way that I would have been open to all that the experiences that novelty could bring. There's no conceivable way that I would have been able to have such a memorable day, and there's no way I would have been able to connect with these incredible other people. The end of 2024 is coming up, and I imagine that a number of us are going to set New Year's resolutions. Now, for some, that might be to get absolutely shredded in the gym next year. However, do you really think that you're going to be able to get shredded in the gym next year if you never have any discomfort? It's the discomfort that allows you to grow bigger and stronger muscles tomorrow. Now, the second lesson I learned is that travel broadens perspectives. Whether it's Africa, Europe, South America, no matter where you're going, you realize that when what your assumptions are about a place, when you finally fly to that place and see it with your own eyes, it's very easy to break down the stereotypes and biases that you hold. Everything that an American education had taught me about Africa, well, that all instantly changed when I finally flew there and was able to see all the incredible people, places, and experience it had to offer. So think about that. All the biases you have are quickly stripped away when you see something with your own 2 eyes. We live in a virtual world now where it's very easy to distance ourselves from other people and other experiences. But travel broadens that perspective. So whether it's the Northern Lights in Iceland, whether it's a rhino in Kenya, whether it's crystal clear waters in Bora Bora, you know that feeling when you're trying to take a picture of it on your phone, you're taking millions of photos and videos, but you just can't quite capture it? How do you think you're going to be able to see it on the other side of that screen? There's no way. So when you finally are able to see it with your own eyes, you'll realize just how big this world is and the minuteness of all of our issues compared to the scale of the amazing world around us. So next time your Starbucks barista messes up the order, you'll realize that in the scheme of things, it really doesn't matter. Now, the third thing that I learned is that we're ultimately a lot more alike than we are different. Despite these people having incredibly different stories than me, despite them having incredibly different backgrounds than me, we all had a lot in common. A lot changes when you go from thinking about us versus them to we. We all had aspirations, we all had dreams, we all wanted to share a meal over friends with a lot of laughs, we all had families, and we all wanted to make a difference in the world around us. All those differences aren't really there because we all have so much in common. Think about this. When you finally go and talk to someone from a foreign place, and you realize that you have so much in common, it'll change your way that you go and talk to complete strangers, even in your hometown. Now, I'm so much more likely to talk to a random person at UVA, or even a random Uber driver in Germany, because I realize that we can all connect over something. Please all go seek discomfort. Now, you don't have to be me, you don't have to be crazily flying over the Atlantic Ocean every single weekend. It doesn't need to be 6,000 miles away. It can be a lot closer than you think. Look to your left, look to your right. I'm sure there's a number of strangers around you. All those strangers, talk to them, say hello. Be open to an uncomfortable conversation because you'll get to meet someone new. Hell, if they're cute, maybe buy them a drink. I'm pretty sure your wristbands get a discount. Be open to the discomfort, but with that discomfort, be open to all that it'll bring you. I'll end with this. Make sure you have so many good memories that you don't remember them all. Please remember that the best stories never started with, "I wish I played it safe." It'll be amazing when you finally leave your comfort zone, just how much you'll grow, the people you'll meet, and the places you'll go. So in the wise words of Ferris Bueller, life moves pretty fast. If you don't leave your comfort zone once in a while, you could miss it. Thank you.